Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Rounding the Bases, presented by Community America Credit Union, investing in you. I'm Joel Goldberg. Super excited for today's episode of Rounding the Bases. A couple quick things. I've been mentioning this recently. If you listen, thank you. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify and you haven't followed yet, following is great. It helps us tremendously. So thank you for that. Share with the friends, of course. We love all of these episodes and the people that we get a chance to meet and talk with. Also, I always forget to do this, but if I'm going to put the Joel Goldberg theme song in everybody's head, a quick shout out. It's been a while, I think, to A.Y. Young, Kansas City artist traveling the world, who was kind enough to put that song together years ago. If it's stuck in your head and that's annoying to you, I apologize, but it's fun. It's a fun little unique thing. And last of all, as always, shout out to my friends at Chief of Staff Kansas City. You don't have to be in Kansas City, but if you're looking for a job, looking for a resource, check them out. Cool office, great people. chiefofstaffkc.com, making connections that matter. I'm really excited about today's connection and guest. Transformation starts today on Rounding the Bases as I'm joined by a guest with a rebellious approach to leadership. Their name is Kelly L. Campbell, a deeply intentional multi-hyphenate with an anti-bureau approach to change that endures. Through the radical lens of trauma-informed healing, they invite the visionaries of today and tomorrow to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, granting permission to disrupt and agency to rebuild so that all are empowered to feel safe, loved, and seen. I just met Kelly before we got going, and I immediately want to move to New York and check out this cottage with the calm serenity of the stream or whatever it is behind. 30 minutes from Manhattan, and yet this peace and tranquility. What more, Kelly, could you want?
Not too much. How you doing, Joel?
It's good to see you, hear you on the podcast, and I'm great to be able to meet you. There's so much we could talk about. I told you we'd go wherever we go, but I want to go back just to my introduction, which my amazing executive producer and assistant Ashley is an incredible writer. But rebellious approach to leadership. Tell me about your approach. There's so many different directions I want to go here with you to leadership. I'll get into the book and get into everything that you're doing, but tell me about your approach to life and leadership.
So, one of these things that historically we have really kept at a distance when we're talking about leadership is the idea of taking responsibility for the things that we have gone through in our past, right? And so there's this idea that what happened to us when we were younger during our formative years, call it 0 to 14, that has no impact on how we are as adults and especially how we show up as leaders. And nothing could be further from the truth, right? So we take ourselves with us wherever we go. That means that if there were things that were unprocessed or unhealed or unintegrated from our previous life before our leadership role, we're just going to keep replaying those same patterns. We're going to keep projecting that pain, is one way to say it, onto other people. And so if we are in leadership positions, it's pretty rebellious to take that radical responsibility for the things that you've gone through and do the work to heal them.
We all, in the simplest terms, and I haven't studied this like you have, but we all have baggage, right? Who's gone through life without baggage? So I guess the simplest piece to that is we all carry it to some extent, whether we want to let people know that or not, right? That's on the simplest level.
Well, I would posit that we do let people know that, whether we want to or not.
Wow, interesting.
Right? Because whether we're actively saying it and stepping into that from a vulnerability space, or we're just showing it through our maladaptive actions, right? Our reactions that really don't jive with, some of the feedback that we might be getting or things like that. We're showing people who we are all the time. So whether we say, oh, this is right, why I'm doing this or not, we're showing it. And the other thing is, those of us who share these things vulnerably are because we are self-aware enough and probably have been doing the work on them The people who don't share and who are really living in that reactionary state probably are not aware. Many times this is very unconscious or subconscious, behavior.
This is so interesting to me because, and I think I can make a connection here with, say, your CEOs or your leader of a business. And in my world, whether that be the manager of a baseball team or the athlete, you have 26 guys on a baseball team. By the way, all different personalities, all different backgrounds, but there's certainly an assumption that they're going to be that gruff, tough athlete and they're invincible. And probably at a certain point, they felt like they were too. Although I will tell you that the younger age athlete right now is more open to therapy. They're more open to vulnerability, whether they talk about it publicly or not. They are looking for resources and help because they know they exist and it's okay, more so than the past, to do that. But I think about the CEO oftentimes being like the athlete. They've got to put out a certain appearance. And I'm sure that you're living in that world all the time. And I was thinking, I mean, trauma-informed leadership coach, most very successful, visible, big name, whatever it is, people are important jobs. Like you said, whether they're showing it or intend to show it or not intend to show it, they usually have a tough exterior. Not everybody.
Mhm.
How do you address that?
Well, I know it's a mask, right? So, how we address it is first they have to be willing. They have to be of the mindset to say, you know what got me here isn't going to get me to the next level. Something's got to change. There has to be a better way to live, lead in the world. I don't know what that is, and I'm looking for some help, right? So first they have to have the self-awareness to say, I'm willing to engage with some idea that I may not know the answer, which is a big deal for a CEO, especially, right? Because historically we've been taught, I was a former CEO, so historically we have been taught that we have to have all the answers, we have to have the solutions to the problems, and in order to earn respect, we've got to really keep this mask of being armored up and not showing emotion and all of that, right? And gender has no impact on this, right? Because there can be women, non-binary people, men, we're all kind of taught the same thing. And so it's really hard to break through that. But again, if you start to question, you start to dial up this internal curiosity to say, I really wonder if there's a better way to do this because the way that I'm doing it right now is actually not sustainable. Maybe this is impacting my marriage. Maybe this is impacting my relationships with my kids. Maybe I see a high turnover. If I'm a CEO of a corporation, I see a high turnover of employees. Maybe there's some, if I'm a manager of a baseball team, maybe there's some stuff going on internally. So whatever the thing is that you're leading, whether it's a team, a corporation, a nonprofit, a family, a community space, whatever it is, the question that comes up in your mind because you're starting to realize like, hey, wait a minute, I might be the common denominator here. Maybe it's time to do some work on this.
Well, there's so many layers to this. I mean, first off, you're right. No one's immune, right? No matter your background, no matter your orientation, no matter your skin color, gender, whatever it is. Yet there are certain populations of any community that are marginalized that then have a steeper hill to climb that may just be, at least in their minds, easier to not say anything because what comes with it when you say something. A leader of a company, a woman that's a leader of a company, may be fighting more of an uphill climb than the man that's in that same role. And it may just not be worth bringing it up there. I know you're going to say that. I think you're going to say that it is worth bringing it up there. But I'm curious how you sort of balance all of that because the playing field is not equal for everybody. If it is, we'd have more equality.
Yeah, definitely the playing field is not equal. And so what you just said, the woman may have a steeper climb. No, the woman absolutely has the steeper climb. Anyone in a marginalized community, women included, has a steeper climb. But I think just having that conversation and not accepting it as like, okay, it's fine. Let's just keep going like that. But accepting that is the case, right? So let's start there as the level set and then have those conversations to say, something like imposter syndrome as an example, right? Imposter syndrome isn't about an individual, character flaw. It's actually a systemic issue. It's a systemic issue if you're talking about leadership or pay gap or things like that, right? It's the issue, the inequality is at the corporate level or at the governmental level or wherever the paychecks are coming from, right? So it's not about the individual. It was Reshma from Girls Who Code just gave a commencement speech at Smith and had this whole really great, if you haven't checked that out, that's a great speech to look at. But yeah, all about this inequality and all about imposter syndrome. And yes, there is a steeper hill to climb for sure, but we have to say something about it. And it's really, the onus is on every single level. It's the leadership, it's the employees, it's the on and on and on. Because when we all start talking about it, then there's collective change that can occur.
There's a more normalcy to it. I mean, I'm amazed. I have an 18 and a 21-year-old, and they're just, and when I say they, I mean their friends, they're the people that they're around, their classmates. They're just more. I'm not saying they're all going out there and volunteering everything that's going on, but they talk about things that we would have never, ever dreamed of talking about. That might not have even crossed the mind.
Yeah.
Which might be a whole different thing of burying some things, but the things that they talk about, and again, the resources that they are willing, not across the board, but willing to consider, weren't options for us before because you wouldn't consider opening yourself up to that.
Right.
Is that fair?
Well, you're talking about destigmatization, right? So you said burying, right? Generations, ours, before us. We didn't talk about these things because it wasn't appropriate to.
Yeah.
There weren't those resources. So, that lack of self-awareness was really a lack of curiosity because societally it just wasn't appropriate, and those resources were not available, right? So yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. And I am very encouraged by, the current youth, the 18, the 21-year-olds and older and younger, because they are more curious. They are willing to have these uncomfortable conversations and look at how that's changing things. Now, you may look around and say, wow, the world is in a tremendous upheaval right now and has been for quite some time. And there's a lot to that, right? But if we are going to try to extract what is the sort of silver lining here, it's that there's a lot coming to the surface, which maybe was repressed in the past. And now these things are coming up to be healed, is sort of what I'm positing. You can't heal things that are kind of stuck in the shadow. You've got to bring them into the light. And so I think collectively, that's sort of what we're seeing. And we do have to thank many of the people in the current generation and generations to come who will make this even easier and easier.
I was going to ask you at some point along the way, or I was probably going to ask you about, where are we at right now? Because it feels like things are worse. And my take on it always is that when it feels a little bit hopeless, I'm talking about progress, decency, equality, that nothing ever, I've said this on the podcast before, nothing ever comes in a straight line. Not never, but rarely do we get from point A to point B without going backwards or sideways or whatever it is. And I don't know if I'm being naive. I don't even know if you have the answer for this, but I don't know if I'm being naive or not when I still have hope on days where it feels really hopeless. Like, how far back are we going? How many decades back are we going on certain issues? And then I wonder, is this just part of the fight? I'm curious your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's personal opinion because I don't think either one of us can have a true answer. But what you're actually describing is sort of what I talk about in the book as like the spiral of healing. It's not a linear path, right? It is going to feel like taking a couple steps forward and 10 backwards, and then feeling fine for a couple of years. And then the thing that you thought you solved internally comes back and slaps you in the face. That's kind of how it works. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. And to your point about it feels worse, listen, trauma has been here forever. It's just that, as you said before, we didn't talk about it back then. We didn't talk about it. We didn't address it. It wasn't a thing in the zeitgeist. And now it is very, very much so. And so it feels like it's getting worse, but maybe we're just talking about it more in combination with the fact that all of this stuff is really getting kicked up in order to eventually heal it. I don't know that that's going to happen in my lifetime or yours, but being part of and contributing to a better world, dare I say, a more harmonious world, a more balanced world, a more equitable world, that feels like purpose to me.
I love that. And I, I think that I agree with you when you say that it's not going to happen in your lifetime. I'll say our lifetime, but maybe it is happening while we're alive.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we're watching the grass grow. We're watching the growth chart day by day of the kid, and we're not seeing it go from here to here.
Right.
Difference is it sometimes goes down and then comes up. But I think too, like you bring something up. You and I were talking before we went on about social media and distractions and notifications and all of that. Oftentimes progress opens up Pandora's boxes to me. And so, and not everything to me needs to be a baseball reference, but I'll do this. Just it popped into my head as you were talking about this, that, we take baseball games, we see more mistakes. We see more mistakes from, say, umpires. Well, are they worse than ever, or is the technology so much better that we see more?
Yeah.
And so I think as we evolve, we're exposed to more. Like, are we really worse off than we were when we were growing up? Are we really worse off today than we were 20 years ago? Or are we better and we're just seeing more? And I think that's kind of what you're getting.
I think it's a great analogy, right? Because technology and that level of technology that we have now when we're watching a baseball game, night and day from 5 years ago, forget about 10 years ago, right? So yeah, we're seeing more, we're exposed to more, we have access to it. Talking about phones, we have access to everything in our pockets at all times. And so if that level of access is heightened, it's not that this is all brand new, right? There have been wars for centuries. There have been so many of the things that we've covered and talked about today for a very long time, but now we have access to it. We're seeing more of it, and we're seeing more of not just the sort of sugar-coated version or what the media wants us to see, but because every single person has a phone on them, we're able to see in real time, right? Think about the murder of George Floyd, right? Like there's so many things that have been rising up are because we have access to this technology and just insight into what is actually happening. And what I see happening is a lot of wounded people who have not done a lot of healing work, right? And so that's where a lot of this is coming up. It's so much repressed trauma, suppressed trauma, unintegrated trauma. I mean, that's because that's the nature of my work. I'm going to kind of focus on that and look at that. But different people in different lines of work will see it differently. I think it's all purposeful though. And I do think ultimately, even though it's hard to have hope some days, I do think ultimately it is pretty purposeful.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, in my heart, I agree with that, and that's what I come back to. Before I get to the book, I just want to go back to your background a lot, because you have a fascinating bio. I mean, you talked about being a CEO. Looking at your website, klcampbell.com, longtime conservationist, living in the Al Gore world for a while. You've been a Reiki practitioner. You talked about being a CEO, consultant to Facebook and NASA. So how did you end up here? And you've got this new book that I'm condensing your whole life into one question and one answer. It's not fair, but I think it's fascinating because it's not just I went from here to here. There's a lot in there.
Yeah. So nonlinear, right?
Right.
When I spent maybe 1.5 to 2 years in corporate America and realized very quickly that was not for me. I was literally driving my motorcycle to work every day, listening to Ani DeFranco. They had no idea what to do with me. And it was just like a really ill fit, right? So because I was watching so much inefficiency in leadership, I was like rebellious, 22-year-old. I'm like, I could probably do this. How hard could this be to like own a company? And part of that, naivete really, I'm grateful for. Part of it was being naive. Part of it was being just having a lot of conviction and I don't know, confidence, maybe instilled by my dad. But I started a company at 22. I ended up selling it at 36. It was a cause marketing agency. So we did digital marketing essentially for nonprofits, foundations, and social impact initiatives. And I really loved that work. I loved my team. I loved the clients, and it was a very successful business. But internally, what I had realized after the fact of selling it was that I had created that business in order to fill an unmet need in childhood. I did not have a mother that was able to love and accept and nurture. So I was constantly seeking that. And so I felt very much not worthy, or like I didn't have value intrinsically. And so I created a business so that I could essentially create the conditions in which that was possible by my employees and my clients it mattered very much to them that I was there and I existed, and all of that. So I think trying to fill that void, I felt so much, I call it unhappiness, but it was so much deeper than that. And so it was impacting my marriage. It was impacting so many things over the course of those 14 years. I ended up selling the company. And then that's where sort of this, I don't know, awakening of sorts happened, where I started getting into spirituality and all of these other healing modalities and things like that. I didn't know what I was going to do after I sold that company because, you're kind of handcuffed with a non-compete. You can't talk to your existing clients, the drill. So really I was like, okay, what do people do? I guess they do consulting. Right. And so I had, a great network because I was so invested in relationships and deep, meaningful relationships and connection that I had some great opportunities to do some consulting with some really incredible organizations. And that very quickly, the money was great, but man, Joel, it was not feeding my soul whatsoever. And so I started coaching other agency owners. And that's really this correlation between trauma, childhood trauma, unprocessed trauma, and your leadership style and efficacy. That started to kind of congeal as to like, wow, this is a conversation that no one is having. This actually is the ethos of the work that I'm doing. And then that's what manifested in Heal to Lead.
All right, so let's talk about the book and the process for you. I mean, we all have different processes in the way we write. Mine was my first book. I'm working on my second. I'm more telling people's stories. I'm a storyteller. We all are, certainly. But was this easy for you? Was it hard? What was the process like? And tell me more about the book.
Yeah, it was not easy. I will start there. As really a classically trained designer, right? Like my first degree was in graphic design. I knew creative process. I thought, oh, no big deal. I'm a great writer. I loved to write. I had passion for it. This was not easy. Partly that was because of the content, and partly that was because of the fact that I was writing my third book before I was writing my first book, and I didn't know it. And so I got some great advice from someone who said, you really need to have your voice coming through. You can't be telling other people's stories as your first book. We need to get to know you, your point of view, etc. So she asked me a question. She said, and this was on the phone, we weren't on Zoom. And she said, close your eyes. I want to ask you a question. She said, when was the first moment you recall stepping into a leadership role? And it was in that moment where, without thinking or judging myself, I got dropped into this little vignette, being 9 years old, sitting in the back of our family car, my brother sitting next to me. My mother was taking us to go see a movie one night. And she parked the car, kind of turned back toward us, and ended up telling us that my father was leaving. He was not going to be living with us anymore. And in that moment, I had so many emotions stirring inside of me. I was angry. I was scared. I was like, oh man, what is my life going to look like? Because I'm already in a pretty abusive environment. If he's gone and he was my protector, like, where does that leave me? Right. And so in that moment, even with all of that stirring, I turned to my brother and kind of consoled him. And that was the moment that stirred or was brought up. And I had not thought of that particular memory since the night in that car.
Wow.
And so the woman who asked me the question said, "Congratulations, kid, you just wrote your introduction to the book." And I was like, "What are you talking about? That's what you want in this book?" She's like, "Yeah, that's what I want in this book. That's your first book." And so that's how it pivoted into, okay, now I'm understanding there's a lot of this correlation between trauma and things that we have not integrated, because trauma is stored in the body. We know that now. Not integrating those things and having them continue to play out over and over again in lots of areas of your life. We got to start talking about that. And so when I went to get a publishing deal, it was like so many publishers said, "We love the proposal. We want to read it when it comes out, but we're going to pass on it because we can't see how this wouldn't sit in self-help. Why would this be a business leadership book?" And it's like, because there's tons of books like this in self-help, right? Similar, not exactly the same, but of this ilk that talk about trauma healing. None of it is in the business leadership space, or organizational leadership, I should say. And so I just dug my heels in. I was like, I'll wait for the publisher who sees it.
It's so interesting. The book is Heal to Lead, Revolutionizing Leadership Through Trauma Healing. It is a business book as well as a self-help. It's everything, right? But I mean, I think the point is that we are programmed, the publishers, consumers are you walk into I don't know if people still do this, a Barnes and Noble, whatever. You go on Amazon and you search in the self-help section. And I think, if I'm hearing this correctly from you, that was a challenge for you to convince them, or to convince any leader, that this isn't just about self-help. This is about being better in business, right? I mean, is this sort of like, you can't help others, or you can't run a business, or you can't do the old put your oxygen mask on first and take care of yourself.
Yeah. And so everyone, really comes back, especially in organizational leadership. They're going to say, well, what's the ROI on healing my trauma? Right? Which is a really funny thing, because if I have to convince you that you're going to have better relationships in your life and your organization is going to flow more smoothly, you'll have more collaboration, more innovation inside of the organization, the culture will be improved upon, and as a lagging indicator, if it is a business, you'll have a higher profit margin. Like, if I have to convince you that doing work on yourself, that you need to have all of those other things, well, then, okay, that's fine. But really, this is about coming back to, is the way that you are living and leading and loving right now, is that working for you? And if the answer at all in your heart of hearts is no, well, then do something about it. And, this is it. You can't control anything externally. We know that. But where you can start is the place where you've been avoiding your entire life. That's what it's about.
Easier said than done, but that's why you do what you do. And, hopefully day by day we get better at all this, all of us. Let me go to my baseball themed questions for you. And now we've talked about, not all of it, but we've talked about a lot of what you've done in your life and career. What's the biggest home run that you've hit?
The biggest home run, I would say, was selling the agency at 36, but not for the reasons that you might think. I think that the home run for me was that awakening. It was the awakening that was catalyzed by the sale of the agency, because that changed my entire life.
That totally resonates too, right? So when someone says, "Hey, congratulations on selling your business," it's not that; it's congratulations on the awakening.
Yeah.
Which came from selling the business. Totally get it. How about a swing and a miss? And what did you learn from it?
So 2006 to 2008, I had started a second business called The Holistic Option. It was sort of like, you think about WebMD, but for instead of conventional medicine, for alternative, holistic, integrative medicine. It was a little too ahead of its curve. What did I learn from it? Well, I was only a few years into starting my first business when I started the second one, right? And so don't do that. Focus was the lesson there. Delegating, not trying to do everything myself. I was classic solopreneur. And then accepting, I think, and this came a little bit later, but accepting that failure, quote unquote failure, can really many times be a gift. And it doesn't mean that you are a failure as a human, right? Because that's shame. It means that the business failed from a financial standpoint, right? Like on paper, that failed. But what it gave me uh, it was really in dividends, so many beautiful things, relationships. There are still relationships that I have to this day that were from that 2006, 2007. Oh, and also the lesson for me was if you are hearing talk of a pending recession, maybe don't start a brand new business and take investment money.
Oh, there's that. Yes.
But that's a little bit more practical.
Yeah. Understood. Last one with the baseball theme question, small ball. It's what I wrote a book on, the little things that you do every single day that make you successful. They don't show up necessarily on the sales sheet or the scorecard, so to speak. What is small ball to you?
Well, comes back to everything I do. It's the lifelong commitment to trauma integration. Every single day, there's some small little thing that you can do to start really bolstering your self-awareness, to increase your ability to lead with compassion, to light the way for other people, to lean into vulnerability. All of the four, fundamentals that I talk about in the book, but there are little things that can be done on a daily basis. And, healing is a lifelong journey. We know that. And it's like and it's okay if you skip a day, right? But it's a commitment. And the people who are committed to it are the people who are going to change the world.
I mean, I think right there, that's the quote, that's the sentence that I think we all can just, that's the one that you put on the wall. Yeah. And you think about every single day, right? Because you're not going back to just the world and the greater discussion that we had. It's not going to go forward every single day, but you got an opportunity tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and it takes work. It takes a lot of work. So, all right, 4 final questions as we round the bases. Sometimes these are serious, sometimes these are fun. They just kind of come to me as we're going, or some of it is the research that we have done. I love this one, that you are a self-proclaimed plant daddy and empath. Now, here's our research. Trying to create a jungle inside their home and growing their own veggies in the yard, loves mosses, ferns, pollinator gardens, animals, and being surrounded by water. Now, I don't know what your place looks like. Tell me what's going on.
You get a little bit of, if you're watching this on YouTube, you get a little bit of the jungle vibes. But yeah, I did my first ayahuasca ceremony in Peru in 2022. And just being immersed in that jungle, and also, having this home where I have the ability to grow food, obviously in New York, so seasonally, but just being surrounded by nature and all of these beautiful pollinator gardens, I really lean into that connection with nature. And part of that is healing, right? It's restoration, it's tending to the earth. That goes back to sort of my conservationist, just ethos as a person. I really believe in tending to our mother, right? And so, for me, it feels healing because my relationship with my biological mother was really tumultuous. So giving back and tending to this, maternal energy from an earth standpoint feels really important to me.
So it brought you, I don't know if full circle is the right way to put it. Has that been a way of addressing trauma?
It is one of about 50, but yes.
I am not naive enough to sit there and say, this is the one thing, and that's it.
There isn't one thing. There isn't one thing. Even the people who do psychedelics and plant medicines will tell you that is not, a lot of people, there's a myth that is sort of like a magic bullet. I'm here to tell you, it is not a magic bullet. It's one of 50 to 100 things. And in the book, I have this supplement that I talk about called myhealingmenu.com, which is a place where there's just a ton of resources of all the different tools and practices and modalities that one can engage with if they're interested.
Yeah, and I would argue that we all could use some form, if not all of it, some of it. We're all different, but I believe we all need the help. Okay. Second question, as we round the bases, we were talking before we went on, and by no means do I think that I'm a podcast originator. I think that I've been in it longer than all the other people that are starting them every single day right now, which, by the way, I think is great. The more the merrier, and people will listen to what they want to listen to. And I think it's pretty cool that we all have the chance to be broadcasters or doing what we do. But
Yeah.
2017, that's nothing. You started way back when. What was the allure to podcast?
Oh, well, it was like this brand new fad at the time. I think it was 2006 or 7 that I started, so about a decade before you. And I was saying to you earlier, it was back in that old school day, and because I had a digital agency, this felt very, normal to me or easy to me. But we had to like take the little MP4 files and upload them to the server. It took forever because internet wasn't what it was. But I had such an amazing opportunity, and that was related to that company that I was talking about before that I started, the second company. It was really a way to engage with people who I would never have gotten access to before. So I had Mayim Bialik on the show because she was part of the Holistic Moms Network. I had Deepak Chopra's daughter on, people who I would not have had access to. And because podcasts were sort of like really, really brand new and probably ended up being sort of a temporary fad back then, because you saw the drop off after like 2008, and then it kind of came back up, maybe, I don't know, 2014 or something. But there was a period of time where it was like nobody was doing podcasts. But that first little like glimmer, yeah, that was super fun. And so I think at that point it was still, wasn't Apple Podcasts at the time. What was it called? I don't even remember what it was called.
I don't either.
Not iTunes. iTunes?
Maybe iTunes.
Something like that. But we were like the number one health show number one show in the health category for a solid year, which I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
I think the other cool thing to it too, at least for me, when I started mine, it was really meant to sort of support the speaking business that I was beginning. And this was advice that I got. It's a content creator, it's a networking tool, it's a branding tool. All of those things have happened for me. I didn't know where it was going, but hundreds and hundreds of episodes later, it's still going strong. And looking through some of your episodes, and I look, and you had Ben Gutman on. I believe he connected.
Yeah,
and
he was my only two-time guest.
Yeah, and he was great. And I have to look back like at the family tree, the lineage of who introduced who to when. Like I don't remember who introduced me to Ben, but then Ben gave me, and everybody Ben has given me has been an amazing guest, yourself included. And then so I don't know, that might be just like a nerdy thing for me, but I love the connections that it makes. And I hope that, certainly everybody listening benefits from those conversations. Selfishly, I like the fact that I get to meet a lot of interesting people that I would have never met before.
Yeah, I loved that also. I had a show, I just ended it last December, but I had that show for 4 years.
Right.
And I used that as what you're saying also, like a tool for connection and business development. And I also, for 3 of the 4 years, had annual sponsors. So it became a revenue generator as well.
Yeah, I mean, all of it, which it's great. It's just, and who knows what the next things are and where this will go. And one day we'll look back and be like, remember when everybody had a podcast? How does that whole thing work? Okay. Third question as we round the bases, and the last one I'll wrap it up with the book. But just curious, with everything that you've done, you talked on the climate piece, what that did for you. Trained by Al Gore, 2017, where we're at right now in the world. I do think the younger generation is much more aware of climate. We still have a massive part. I don't know about the rest of the world, but certainly here in the United States, of I think people that say, it's not me, it doesn't matter. And then still people that seem to think that global warming doesn't exist because it's really cold on a given day. Like just like crazy stuff, like on the simplest level. Where are we at? Are we getting better there?
No, the quick answer is no, we're not getting better.
It's hoping for some optimism.
No, I mean, listen, I'm a realist also.
Yeah.
So I went through the Climate Reality Project with Al Gore, 2017. That program has been in existence for a long time. And it's great. It's training a lot of climate reality leaders to go out and do presentations and talk about what's happening with the climate. But, I do touch on this obviously in the book because we're talking about restoration with the land, but it's going to take a lot, it's going to take different thinking. We can't keep going the same way that we're going. This hyper consumerism, this idea that some people don't think it's real. I mean, I know it's a very small amount, but still any kind of conversation. It's out there. Yeah, for sure. And if businesses, and this is where the high conscious leadership piece comes in, if businesses continue to operate with the sole intention to make money no matter the cost, that's actually where our biggest problem is, right? So it really is, the majority of it is with the corporations and the big industries, big oil, etc. So there are small things that we can do on an individual basis, but it is going to take the entire village, by which I mean the world, in order to change this and to get it back into a reversal standpoint.
So important, every bit of it. They talk about watching the grass grow. This is like on a whole nother level, in terms of we're going to blink and we're going to be gone, and where's the world at? So okay, the walkout question. I talked about the book. I'll tie it in though with your speaking. I want to be able to promote that too as a fellow speaker myself. It's important, and I love the talks you have are so unique on the website. Popular Talks, the new TLC, Trauma, Leadership, and Consciousness, the foundation of. But I should pause. It sounded like it was one run-on long speech. That was the first one. Second, the foundations of high conscious leadership. Third, the power of self-awareness and leadership. Four, what plant medicine can teach us about our own capacity. Those are the popular ones. I didn't read them in any particular order, but whether it be talking about the book or I'm interested in TLC, Trauma, Leadership, and Consciousness, which I know is completely related to your new book. What is TLC?
Yeah, so TLC became this sort of moniker. It's how I think about, we've known, TLC as tender love and care, but really we need more than that. And we need a deepening and, this idea of trauma, leadership, and consciousness as like an intersection. I think that's where conversations need to go. And it's not about keeping it at the surface level anymore, or being polite and making everything about, empathy. It's really about going deeper and having these uncomfortable conversations so that we can understand what's happened to leaders. What does actual real leadership look like? What does that look like for today? What does that look like for tomorrow? And then higher states of consciousness. So this whole idea of high conscious leadership, which is a separate talk, but all related to the book, is conscious leadership is wonderful. It puts people, planet, and profit on equal plane. We've known about that for about a decade. But what I'm positing is, how can you develop self-awareness as a leader, as a conscious leader, if you're not doing your own inner healing work? And so that's where the high conscious leader part comes from. And the new TLC is also the name of the Substack that I write. So it's just kind of been a thread, a little bit of a moniker and a little bit of a thread for the work that I do, what I write about, and what I speak on.
So you're already on the Substacks. You're well beyond podcasts now at this point, right? That's the new thing, the Substacks.
Yeah.
Well, this is all such great stuff. It's all important. By the way, it applies to all of us, no matter who you are, what you do, where you are, whatever. It applies to every one of us on different levels. We're all unique in that way. I want to encourage everybody, again, whether it is the Heal to Lead book, whether it's the speaking, the writing, any bit of it, the podcasts, you can find it all at klcampbell.com. I now have Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls in my head because of TLC, which is fine. I can think of more things, I guess, to do. But I love the new meaning of it and the purpose that I know that it's given you and everybody else's lives that you are affecting. I'm very grateful to Ben for making the connection. And thanks so much, Kelly, for spending time around the basis.
Thank you so much, Joel. Pleasure's been mine.
It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg.